The Unite Homeschool Support Network was pleased to host Courtney Gallion of Baloo School on Monday, July 30th for an online seminar about how to help your twice exceptional student. Courtney herself is a twice exceptional person, and she experienced many of the same difficulties that our children experience from day to day. She has learned to overcome them herself and gone on to become a successful teacher both in the classroom and online. Let's listen here as Courtney helps us to understand some ways and strategies that we can assist our students.
Today we're going to be talking about helping your 2E student. That's what the vernacular kind of we call it twice exceptional. And while we all think our own kids are exceptional because, we made them and they're ours, what exceptionality refers to in this case is an exception to the general rule of how people learn and how people operate. So exceptional in this case is something I don't like the words disorder or disability because I don't see it that way. I see this as just a different style of learning and a different way that we have to talk to certain students. And so I know that a lot of kids who do have these exceptionalities, their parents want to homeschool them because the public school system is maybe not as capable of responding to those individual different needs. So a little bit about me. My name is Courtney Gallion. I am a current tutor and marketing director at Baloo School. I have taught English and business classes for 8 years to kids in grades 9 through 12. So I taught everything from freshmen all the way through seniors, and that's a lot of different learning styles. I'll tell you that. Just from you, if you have younger kids, you'll be amazed at the process of the difference between a 9th grader and a 12th grader. So I really had to adjust and learn a lot of different teaching styles and different methods. And I had a lot of freshman boys, and they're pretty wild and crazy. So I had to learn a lot of different strategies and adapt to keep their interest. In our company, Baloo School, we are unique in that all of our teachers are certified, experienced classroom teachers. We don't have people on our staff that are what we call subject matter experts. We have teachers who are experts in their subject matters. So we would not, for example, hire an engineer to teach math. An engineer might be extremely capable of teaching math, but we really believe that teaching is its own skill and its own strategy. And so we always make sure to pair our teachers with the students that they're going to learn best from. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, is those different teaching strategies, because anybody can learn a subject. Anybody can learn how to do something, but not everybody can teach someone else how to do something. My dad is a super great example of that, because he always said, well, I showed you how to do it. Why don't you remember? And if he doesn't let me do it, then it doesn't sink into me. So and this is where you can find us. You can always email me directly as well. Okay, so what is twice exceptional? And this is not an exhaustive list, but twice exceptional means that a student has 2 or more of these designations. So I highlighted gifted because that is often paired with one or more of these, and that can make a student appear A, like they're not gifted, or B, like they're not struggling. And so we want to make sure that we acknowledge both that those gifts and that struggle as well. And they're not, that's the struggle that I had growing up, that I didn't realize I had ADHD until I was an adult. And looking back on that, had I had knowledge and understanding of that and more support, I could have done so much better academically. I really struggled when I got to college and everything was difficult because I'm not a math person, and my degree involved a lot of math that I really, really struggled with. And so now my daughter, bless her heart, is autistic, OCD, and ADHD. And so we've had to really manage all three of those exceptionalities, and it's a challenge because you don't necessarily know what is coming from what. So these, you might be familiar with all or some of these. I think we probably all know what those first few are. Dyscalculia is basically, the easiest way to understand it is dyslexia for math and numbers. So if I'm reading a number as 5,627, it might be 5,276. It's the inability to kind of see numbers as they are, and it's very hard to diagnose and to recognize. And that's another problem that or another, not problem, but another challenge that can come with students like this, is a lot of times their struggles are invisible, they're difficult to diagnose, they can be really complicated. Auditory processing disorder is something that comes oftentimes with ADHD, and it's difficulty understanding verbal commands or directions. And there can be different levels of this, but if you ever meet people who always watch television with the subtitles on, they might have a little bit of this. Because I personally have a hard time with following the plot of television shows and character discussions if I can't see the words, because I'm a reading, writing English person. So it really helps me in my understanding if I can see the words that I'm hearing as well. And in the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about executive functioning issues.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Of course.
So I just want to be clear. So from what I understood, twice exceptional is, are those students always going to be gifted in some areas and then these other things? Because I mean, you highlighted gifted, and that's what I thought it was. They're going to be gifted, but then they also have one or more of these struggles. Is that true or false?
Mostly true, yes. This presentation is more geared toward how to deal with students who are both gifted and are suffering, or not necessarily suffering, but have another one of these disorders present. So, and executive functioning is something that we all have to teach our kids as they grow up. And it's not something that most of us are even aware that we're teaching our kids as they're growing up. But these are the things that go into executive functioning. These are things that we have to do as a human being to function in the world. We have to have impulse control. We have to control our emotions, be flexible. We have to have working memory, self-awareness, planning and prioritizing, initiating tasks, and keeping track and organizing things. And I will tell you right now that almost every single teenager that I've met struggles with some of these. Even if they're not twice exceptional, even the most put together kids, they all struggle with these things. And so as we're teaching our kids, we have to remember that these things that come naturally to us are still developing in the brain of a kid, because the neural pathways and the neural connections that make us essentially adults don't stop developing until about the age of 23. So even your late high school, early college students are going to probably struggle with some of these. Students with ADHD struggle with these significantly more. And so that's why I kind of wanted to highlight these, because we're going to use some of these to kind of address the topics that we're going to talk about today. Planning and prioritizing, task initiation, and organizing, I think, are the three that are the most closely related with academic education. Because those are learned behavior that students are not necessarily going to want to do these things, and they're not necessarily going to come naturally. So that's what we have to as teachers and parents, is to support them and give them the tools to help with this. And we're going to talk about some things that will help them or stay planned, tasked, and organized. Okay, so obviously in the homeschool market, or the homeschool classroom, you're not going to overlook your students, right? That's just not something that's going to happen. But I do like to address this because I didn't even know this about myself until I was an adult. So the students are overlooked often because one exceptionality overshadows the others. So gifted students might be struggling with something invisible that we can't see, versus a lot of times we also fail to acknowledge the gifts that struggling students have, or that students with ADHD or OCD and autism, they have amazing brains and they are gifted, but those struggles that they have often overshadow those gifts. And so that's why frequently these exceptionalities, or oftentimes, are overlooked. And then some of them are difficult to see and difficult to diagnose, like auditory processing disorder, dyscalculia. Those are disorders that are very, very hidden. And people may never know they have them. And it could be like, oh, I'm just bad at math. Or a lot of times students with auditory processing disorder are accused of not listening, because it'll often look like they're not listening because they're not fully digesting verbal information the way that other students are. So it's possible that you might have a student like this and you don't even know it, or a child like this, because like I said, I lived this reality for 30 years before I realized, oh, okay, well, I have ADHD, and that's why I always struggled with certain things. And I use a lot of that experience to help students understand themselves and understand what they can do, because we can all learn, we can all achieve, we just can't all do it the same way. Okay, so this is the part where I start talking about like some actual strategies that you can use, some takeaways that you can use in your homeschool classroom to help students. And the first one is to allow them to explore subjects in which they naturally excel. So I always thought I was bad at math. And truthfully, I'm not great at math, but my brain just is not interested in math. So after a certain period of time, I just shut down. But I could write for hours and hours and hours. So with students particularly that have autism and ADHD, they can actually hyper focus. So a lot of the preconception of ADHD students is they can't focus for a long time. And that's not necessarily true. They can't focus on something that doesn't interest them for a long time. If something is of high interest to students with autism and ADHD, they can focus for hours to the exclusion of almost everything else, including like going to the bathroom and drinking water and standing up and sometimes even blinking, you know, if it's a video game, if you have kids that play video games. So one of the things that we can do to help those students is to allow them to come up with projects and curriculum that are focused around those subjects that they excel in. So, and it could be, it might not even necessarily be a subject. So if my kid maybe was really focused and really loved trains, I could say, okay, design a project where you teach math using trains and just see what they come up with. And you'll be amazed. When I did this in my high school classroom, I had kids that would come up with amazing ideas and ways to teach themselves what they wanted to learn with something they were passionate about. And the older the students get, the fewer parameters I would involve putting onto them. So obviously you're not going to let a kindergartner design their own train project, but you could say, okay, well, find 6 different ways to categorize these trains or to put them in groups. And from there, they will begin to feel ownership of their own learning. And once they do that, they're going to be so much more into the learning. If they feel like they've chosen to do this, they're going to be so much more excited to do it. And they might end up during these projects finding a passion that they didn't even know they had, because a lot of times one thing leads to another, where especially for older kids, when they're doing research and inquiry, they might say, okay, well, trains are powered by steam and I want to know how steam engines work. And then they might think, well, if steam engines work like this, and how do combustion engines work? And giving them a little bit of space and freedom to follow those passions will result in learners who are super highly engaged. And you guys can ask questions at any point if you feel like there's something an idea you have, or a question, or anything that's unclear. Feel free to.
I want to fill in with something. I am a huge proponent of what you just talked about, and projects, and I love to help people with the details of that and the in and out, and how to use projects to help with executive function. One of the things that homeschool parents can worry about are gaps in learning, but I just want to say, don't worry about the gaps in learning. When you start with these high interest ideas and give them projects, you would be amazed at how much they will learn from that. And really, gaps in learning, especially in the early years, should not be a consideration at all, because they can get history, they can get science, they can get a lot of these things later as they've matured more.
Well, every human on the planet has gaps in learning. And there are general knowledge, there's thousands upon thousands of pieces of general knowledge that we have as human people. And not every single person is going to get all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, of course we want to work to fill the gaps, but every student has gaps in learning.
Yep.
And if you're lucky, you can find them and fill them. But we're moving toward an increasingly specialized world where people are having to have really deep knowledge of one thing that they do and they do well. And if you inspire inquiry, those students will naturally fill in their own gaps before too long. Okay. I am a big proponent of this, and I need to do better on it with myself. But customized time limits are super, super important for students, and they will vary wildly based on your student's age and their interest levels. So when I was teaching my high schoolers, I could sit next to a student and be helping them with something, and we were, you know, actively engaged in conversation and working on something. And there was almost a moment where I could see that just stopped. And regardless of how much more I pushed that kid to finish what he was doing, it absolutely would not happen. And that's okay. You just have to be aware of it. So for me, my learning time limit as an adult is 30 minutes of something that I am completely uninterested in. I know that we all have to learn things that we don't love. That's just part of being a person on the planet. So mine is 30 minutes, and I can do anything for 30 minutes. I can focus on astrophysics, but on minute 31, my brain just goes, whoop, that's enough. And anything that is forced upon me, or anything that I try to teach myself from that point forward, just doesn't sink in. So you guys are in a really unique position that you are working with your students super closely. You'll be able to see that shutdown when you're working with your students. And you'll be able to say, okay, at this point, at the 35-minute mark, or the 20-minute mark, they're not absorbing any additional information here. They're still reading, I'm still talking, they're still watching this video, but nothing is actually sinking in. And 30 minutes is actually a pretty long time. It seems like it's short, but it's really not. And I'm not saying that you only do math for 20 minutes a day. You know that your child isn't interested in math, so you do math for 20 minutes. And then maybe you do science for 20 minutes, or maybe you take a walk for 20 minutes, and then you do reading, and then you can come back to math once their brains have engaged in something that's not as unpleasant to them. I talked a little bit about hyperfocus for students who have ADHD and autism. They can get lost in something, just absolutely have an unlimited attention span for something. And if they are really in love with a topic, you might have to say, okay, you can only do this for an hour and a half before you have to do your math homework, or get up and stretch, or go get a snack, or switch to a different subject. So it's all about, the most important thing when you're customizing time limits is to understand your student and what they're interested in and what they're passionate about and what they like to do. For older students, trying to give them control of their own schedule is an important step in getting them ready for the world and allowing them to have some control over what they're doing. And this is where I think the public school system does not do a good job, because students have very little control over what they're learning, when they're learning it. When I used to teach in the classroom, I would see students who were really calm in the morning, and they were half asleep. And then from second to about fourth period, they were really focused and calm enough that they were learning, but not so calm that they were falling asleep. And then the afternoon was just, they were bonkers. And so using that as a framework, if you have a student that's a morning person, put the harder tasks or the harder subjects in the morning and the more fun, more interesting things in the afternoon. I don't like to call it a reward system, because I don't think learning should be a reward. Like, I think that should just be something that you're consistently doing every day for the rest of your life. But you can almost look at it like you're taking advantage of when they have the best and most engaged attention spans. And exercise is super duper important for everyone. Obviously, it helps keep us alive as human beings, but for ADHD brains specifically, exercise has been proven to be one of the best coping mechanisms for those racing minds, because those students can have 70 thoughts an hour, and they're just coming like this, and they're just rapidly firing, and it's exhausting, quite frankly. But exercise will refocus the mind. It helps build endorphins that keep you energetic, keep you focused later in the day, because, and again, this is where I think the public school system could take a beat and incorporate more movement and more exercise into students' days, because I would see kids by the afternoon that were they were stir crazy because they hadn't moved enough. They hadn't gotten the opportunity to get out and do things. And I'm also a big fan in incorporating movement in learning. And unfortunately, we do this less and less as we get older. When you're teaching young kids language, there's a lot of hand signals and movements and things that we do to physically sort of not only illustrate, but help them associate movement and activity with learning. And there's a style of learning we call kinetic learning. You probably have heard of auditory learners and visual learners. Kinetic learners are people who learn best when they are engaged in some sort of physical movement. And I always found this worked really well for me if I had to memorize things. So if I had to memorize things, I would either record it with my voice and listen to it while I was dancing or on the treadmill or on the stationary bike or maybe cleaning the house even. But the brain body link is often overlooked, and so that's hugely helpful in getting students to not only stay engaged, but to make those memories stickier. If you're moving while you're doing something, that memory and understanding the concept tends to last longer. Okay, so I did want to address for a moment technology. I learned something that surprised me recently, and it was this first statement that employers are reporting that fewer students are graduating with the necessary tech skills to function in their jobs. That surprised me because we think of the younger generations as just being super tech savvy. My daughter had an Amazon Fire tablet when she was 5, and she can do things that I don't even understand. But those are not the kind of tech skills that employers are looking for. So incorporating technology can not only pique student interest, but it will make them more valuable in their future jobs. And one thing that I've seen really disappearing is typing. I was taught how to type. I had to take a typing class, and we sat there with the little cover over our keyboards, and we had to learn to intuitively know where those buttons were. And I know that in the public school system, they're not teaching typing anymore. They're just assuming that if a kid grew up on the computer, they know how to type. And it's not necessarily the case. Excel is one of the biggest requirements or skills that employers are wanting their new graduates and new hires to have. So if you can incorporate Excel into your learning, you are going to do your kid a great service. And there's lots of ways that you can incorporate math in Excel, because Excel is a phenomenally powerful program, but very few people know how to use it to its full capabilities. So if your student is into math, having them develop projects like we talked about with Excel and with math formulas and calculations, that can be a really powerful tool. Kids are learning to code earlier and earlier, and you've probably seen online coding academies. I know there's actually a physical one down the street from where I live, and my husband didn't even know what it was. He's like, "What is Kids Who Code?" And I said, "Well, it's learning to speak the language of computers and writing codes to make computers do things." And he was like, "Children do that?" And I said, "Yeah, you can get coding kits for kids as young as like 5 or 6. I bought my friend's daughter one where she had to build and then program wooden dinosaurs because she was really into dinosaurs. So I thought that would be really fun. It even came with a little tiny plastic screw gun, like a little child working screw gun. I thought it was super adorable. And one of the biggest trends now that's happening is AI. And schools you may have heard of a program that's been buzzing a lot lately called ChatGPT. And with this program, you can tell it what you want and it can write for you. And public schools are very scared of this because they think kids are gonna cheat. But we have to, it's our responsibility as adults and educators to prepare students for the world that they're going to live in. And they're going to live in a world that is dominated by artificial intelligence. And so teaching them how to use those, I think, is super important for this next generation of kids that's going to come of age in the next 10 or 15 years, because they're going to live in a world that's very different than the one that we live in. And we can't expect that the way that we've always taught and the way that students have always learned and the way that we've always operated is going to work for this next generation of kids. So we have to, as parents and educators, we have a responsibility to our students to understand what the future is going to look like and help them live and thrive in that future. And it's not going to look the same as it did for us growing up. So, giving your students the capability to investigate these tools and explore them and bring them into your classroom is super important, because we can't just pretend like they don't exist.
My daughter got a job working for the city. She loves the job. It's a great job. But one of the things that was on the application is that you did have to know Excel. She doesn't have to know tons of Excel, but I made sure that she knew how to use it and was exposed to it. And so now that she's on the job, she said it's very little that she has to use it, but it's also not very hard when they get older to teach themselves that, because there's so many different online platforms that teach it. But I agree with what you're saying. Homeschool kids can really be above the curve in these areas right here that you listed.
Absolutely, because I can tell you that the teachers in the public school are fighting it, and that's not going to be a sustainable way to prepare the next generation of students for the world, because you can fight it all day long, but it's not going away. So instead of discouraging the use of these types of tools, we teach them how to use it. Because if an AI program can write better than I can as a writer, then my job as a writer is probably not one that's going to be sustainable for the long-term future.
Right now, from what I understand, like with ChatGPT and other programs that are mostly helping more novelists than nonfiction writers, but they're helping with title creation for YouTube channels and things like that, is that it increases your productivity. So it may not ever replace humans, but if you want to be able to produce as quickly as the competition, you have to be using these things.
Yep. And I've played with them. I've played with these tools a little, and I've seen what they can do. And it's shocking, because I've been writing nearly every day of my life since I was 5 years old. It's a passion of mine. And I have what I consider to be a specific and unique voice when I write. And I can program a few words into an AI, and it will be nearly indistinguishable for something I wrote. And it's incredible. And if we're on the forefront of this, and we're giving our kids these experiences and these tools to do that, I mean, there's no limit to what they'll be able to achieve. And my last recommendation is, sometimes we just need to get help. A lot of times students need to get help from other students, because I've heard my kids break it down in a way that I never would have thought of, by using examples and analogies that are on their level. So small group classes are an important way that you can do that. one-on-one tutoring. I know that I needed tutoring in math when I was a kid, and I got so sick of doing it with my dad. I would fight it every single night because he would just drill me and drill me and drill me and drill me. And I did ultimately learn my subtraction and multiplication facts, but sometimes you just need to hear it in a different way from a different person. And just having those peer mentors and support system with your students. I'm sure that you guys are all members of groups where your kids can get together and help one another and talk to one another and share ideas. But I think it's really important for them to see other students having the success that they want for themselves, and seeing that that's possible from their peers, from students that are a little bit older than them, from others. So that's pretty much the end of my talk. So
Great. Thank you. And Courtney, would you like to share? I know that Baloo School offers all sorts of services, not just for twice exceptional students, but for every student. Would you like to share a little bit about Baloo School's offerings?
I would love to. We have, like I said in the beginning, and for those of you just joining us that didn't hear the beginning of what Angela and I were talking about, we only hire certified teachers with classroom experience. So every teacher on our staff has been in an actual classroom with actual students that have all sorts of gifts and challenges that they've experienced over the course of a number of years. So a lot of tutoring companies I've seen focus on people that are either highly educated or have a lot of degrees or have a lot of experience using math in their career. And that is not the same as the ability to teach. I've known people that were great writers, but not good at teaching writing, because understanding how to do something and understanding a subject and being a good teacher for that subject is certainly not the same. So our teachers are all very well interviewed, vetted, and we also try to match our teachers with students based on their teaching style, because we have teachers that are a little bit more formal and a little bit more serious and a little bit more fun, and we have some that are younger and some that are older and some that are more and less energetic. And so what we try to do before we suggest a teacher to one of our families is try to figure out what they're looking for in terms of their learning style, in terms of their struggles, in terms of their strengths, and then match them with somebody that's going to really help them specifically. Relationships are the central component of any learning relationship. You cannot truly have great learning without a great relationship. And so we focus not just on helping kids pass tests or let's teach them how to use the Pythagorean theorem and then we're done. We focus on building those long-term relationships so that students can excel in those subjects that they're either really interested in or really not great at. Because we have some students that come to us because they love to write, and so they want to work on their writing and get better at writing. And then we have some students who aren't great at writing and want to improve their writing so they can be on level with their peers, or so they can get an A in their writing class. And maybe that's not necessarily something they're passionate about, but people people seek out education for a variety of different reasons and have a variety of different goals. So we always try to keep that in mind when we're matching our teachers and our students. So, and we're very flexible in that we have the ability, if a parent comes to us with maybe 3 or 4 kids who all want to learn the same thing, we have the ability to very quickly and very easily put a class together. So if we have a group of students with maybe a homeschool group or organization or a co-op, or we had a set of twins recently that wanted to take a class together. So we're able to very quickly and very easily put those types of classes together and service our clients' needs because of how hands-on we are with our students and with our teachers.
That's great. Thank you so much, Courtney, for coming on today. I think it's been a really helpful discussion, and I know that you've had lots of ideas for us in ways that we can support our students, in more creative opportunities. So thank you very much for coming.